Okay, so when playing this back, it kind of pops off the wall a little too fast from there to there. And so we're just going to kind of tweak with this a little bit. There's a chance that this keyframe is just too close. That happens a little too fast. There's also a chance that we can just adjust this a little bit with our curve. So let's see about that first and see how that looks. Yeah, I think it just goes a little too fast. So I wonder if we can grab this. Let's pull this down a little bit. Angle it a little less steep. And let's see how that's looking. Okay. So the only other thing I would really say is that it feels like it kind of settles in a little too slow again. So I think it needs to. I think that this last keyframe still needs to be stretched out a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set this maybe to 70. Let's see about that. And actually how I did that again, let me undo that and show you really quick. If I hold down Shift and then middle mouse click, drag, right, it's going to highlight that section in red, and then I can use these little double arrows here to shift this down. Okay, let's see what that looks like. Okay, so it's kind of hard to envision without the ball bouncing. So let's go ahead and hit 5 so we can imagine the ball bouncing a little bit more. Yeah, so it's not bad. Okay, so we're going to do one more thing here. And that is we're going to do a couple more things, but that's all we're really going to do to this main controller right now. We may shift that timing just a little bit more later, but right now I think that this is looking pretty good, and we're just going to go ahead and move forward with this. I think what we could do if we really wanted to, and we may go ahead and look at this right now, is it needs just a little bit of a bobble when it hits the ground on that last piece. So we could actually do that if we would like. We could go right in here and just kind of do a little bitty mini bounce as it hits the ground. And I'll just show you how to do that. So we're on our translate Y. I can actually just go, let's say maybe, how many frames is that? 2 frames. And let's go ahead and go 4 frames out. And I'm just going to right click on my translate Y and say key selected. And so that just set a keyframe on my translate Y. And that means on frame 30 I can do that again, key selected, and then just sort of change my translate Y, or I don't have to actually move it in there. I could actually go in here if I wanted to and just move it in there to get a little bit of a bobble. I'm just going to grab that section and hit F just so I can see it a little bit better. And then I'm going to again come on, there we go. Sorry, my computer plays back kind of chuggy when I'm recording videos. So I'm just going to add a little bit of a bobble to this here, a little bit more of that impact on it by breaking these tangents. And just a little one. And of course we could add another one at the end of that if we wanted to, but I think that that's going to, I think that may be a touch too much. Pull it down a little bit. Adjust my tangents. Okay, now I want to get, so that's not bad. So now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at this in terms of squash and stretch, right? So for squash and stretch, I'm only going to be animating this control, okay? And somewhat differently from how we animate it in class, I can also rotate the direction of this squash and stretch. So there's a couple different options we would have here where we can rotate the whole ball using the blue control, or I can grab this little bitty blue control that's going vertical. It's actually a darker blue. Here, let me show you in the perspective window. So this blue controller rotates the entire thing. This blue controller just sort of rotates the squash and stretch part of the rig. And so the reason for that is if I stretch the ball here, but I want that stretch to happen at a slightly different angle, I could rotate that. Okay? And so I'm actually just going to set some keyframes on that and the squash and stretch kind of alongside each other. So we'll go to 0. And then I'm going to go ahead and go back to my my camera window again, just so I can kind of see how it's going to be set up. I'm going to select this top squash and stretch controller, and I'm just going to hit S here because I know where I want it to be. And so I go down to the point where it contacts the ground and hit S. Go back up to the peak of my jump, S, and so I'm just going to kind of do this on each of these contact points, each of these points where I know I want a keyframe. Now you actually see I'm not actually making any changes right now. I'll go ahead and put one here too, where it contacts the ground, or where it contacts the wall, and then where it contacts the ground. And then I'll go ahead and do one for the little bitty hop as well. Okay. And so now I have this on all these different points. I'm going to go ahead and do a squash here. Okay. And so now what I can do is, I'm alright with that squash being there. Yeah, I'm just going to go through and squash on the points that I want it to kind of... Okay, so this one's a weird one, but I do want a little bit of squash here, but I'm going to have to change the angle of this squash here in a couple minutes. And then I want a little bit of squash there, and then I'll probably not have any on the very end of it. So if I watch this again, and again I can turn off my NURBS curve so I can see it a little more clearly. Let me see if it'll actually play it more smoothly. Okay, so that's not bad. So now the next thing I need to do is sort of angle my squash and stretch, right? Or actually no, next thing I want to do is I'm going to put in my stretch. So I haven't put that in yet. So the frame before I squash, I'm going to go ahead and stretch, right? And the frame after I squash, I'm going to stretch a little bit as well. I may take back some of this stretch, that may be a little too much. And so I'm going to do this every time the ball hits the ground, and we're doing this so it feels like it's the absorption of energy that is making the ball squash, right? And so maybe a little bit of a stretch right before here. And this is going to be a little confusing here. A little bit of a stretch. And then set that to 0 to kind of even that out. And we didn't really have one on the last one. And so now if we watch that, it's probably playing back pretty chunky on yours. We're getting some pretty good squash and stretch. But the squash and stretch isn't happening at the right angle. Okay, and so this is where we're going to start tilting our ball. So the first thing, that's this vertical control that's going up and down. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just sort of pin it down for my first keyframe, right? Like there. And so I know that right here on my stretch I need it. No, I know that on my squash I'm fine with it being this angle. So I can just go ahead and set a keyframe there. But then on my stretch, stretching a little bit more like that. Okay, then when I pop back out of there, I kind of want it leaning toward the direction that it is moving. So you see what we're kind of getting there? Okay, and so when we get up here to this midway point, I probably could zero that back out. And then we're going to do that again here. I know that on the ground, I'm alright with it being there. But angling it in, there, angling it back out here. Now here's where we're going to get into some sort of strangeness because, say like about here, I'm going to sort of start rotating this toward the wall, okay? And that way, when we get this squash and stretch in the wall, it's actually squashing toward the wall, not toward the ground. And then I'm going to sort of quickly turn this back down this way. It happens over one frame, but... And then by this point, I could sort of zero that back out. Okay? And so now, if I turn off NURBS curves, let me watch this animation. Okay, so the squash and stretch is looking pretty good. So now my only concern is that the ball's not rolling. And so there's another control we're going to look at for that. Now this control doesn't work exactly the way I wanted it to. It's this, if we go to our perspective view, it is this little red controller here in the center. Now the problem with it is that if I hit S on that, it's going to set keyframes on these translates X, Y's, and Z's, and so sort of how this rig is set up, that's a bad thing for that to happen because these are being controlled by something else. So I believe you can lock these and right click and say lock selected and then hide selected, or lock and hide selected. But instead of doing that, I'm just not going to hit S when I set my keyframes. Instead, I'm going to set my keyframes using my rotate X controller. And because I really only need to set a few keyframes on this one anyway. So let's go back to our, I'm sorry, I have to go back to my camera. One. Okay. Sorry, this doesn't update very quickly. And I may just full screen this one. So I know I want a keyframe on this start frame. So my key selected. Okay, and it's going to roll forward until it hits this wall, which is about right there. Okay. So on my rotate X, I'm just going to rotate it forward a few times, and I'm going to get an auto key there. Okay, so that's looking good. But now I want it to start rotating in the other direction, and it's going to stop, looks like on frame 65. So I'm just going to rotate it like this. Okay, and so now if we watch this, okay, so I think the first half of it, as it's bouncing, looks really good. The bad part is after it hits the wall, it feels like it's kind of sliding along the ground instead of rolling, right? So again, to fix that, we're going to have to select the red controller. We're going to have to go back to the graph editor. And so I can look at my rotate X curves, and you'll see that I'm probably alright with how this curve is working, how the first little section here is working. It's how it transitions from here to here that I don't like. So I'm going to again break my tangents, and then just on this side I'm going to go ahead and sort of adjust this because I want it to kind of mimic the same curve that I have on my translate Y as it rolls backwards. And so if I watch this now, let's see. Okay. It's closer. It still feels like it slides a little bit, and that may be because this isn't going quite far enough. So I can just shift this keyframe a little bit and just kind of play around with that until I get it rolling the exact right amount. So that may be a little bit too much, but again, it's just kind of playing with this curve and making it work exactly the way you want to. I'm running out of time now. I will post this video and I'll also post the final animation.